The wagons had been coming down the river road since 3 in the morning, and they did not stop coming for 87 days. That is what a sugar campaign was. The Bird Creek beet-sugar works stood on a bend of the Pajaro River in Santa Cruz County, California, and it had exactly one season in it, from the middle of October, when the growers began lifting, until the last beet in the valley had gone through the knives. Once the slicers turned, the works ran day and night. It did not stop on Sunday. It did not stop for a birth or a burial. It could not stop, because a beet out of the ground is a spoiling thing, and the whole year's money of 141 farms was standing in the sheds and the yard in piles, losing sugar every day it waited. 103 men ran it in 3 watches. There was a lime kiln and a carbonation house, a diffusion battery, filter presses, vacuum pans and centrifugals, a wooden flume that floated the beets in from the sheds, and a brick stack that had not been cold since the 14th of October. Every man on the place understood the first law of the trade before he understood anything else about it. Because the chief engineer said it out loud to every new hand, nothing in this works is allowed to stop. And in the kitchen at the north end of the yard, one woman held the boarding contract for all 103 of them. Her name was Etta Boyce. She was 37, she had cooked 6 years in Nevada mill boarding houses and 1 season on a threshing run. And she had come down to the Pajaro Valley in September with a wagon, a set of pans, and a reference from a mill superintendent that said, in full, that she had never once been late. The works stopped $20 a month out of every man's wages and paid it over to her, and out of that she bought every pound of stores, fired every stove, and cleared what was left. In 1888, the man who held the same contract had cleared about $85 a month and had run the kitchen alone with a hired girl 3 days a week. Etta Boyce hired 4 helpers before she had cooked a single dinner. She did not advertise for them, and she did not ask the valley for cooks. On her second day on the property, she went into the office and asked Norman Fisk, the bookkeeper, for the names of every man the works had paid off, pensioned off, or turned away in the last 2 years, and she went down that list with a pencil, and then she went and found them where they were living. She hired every one of them on the spot, and she told each of them the same thing, which was that she was not hiring a strong back. She was hiring the one thing that man could still do better than anybody on the property, and that he would be doing it at 2 in the morning. That was the whole of it. Nobody at Bird Creek ever said her food was bad. Nobody said the platters came up short, or that supper was late, or that the coffee was thin, or that the meat was old. In 87 days, not one complaint was ever made about anything that came out of that kitchen. The complaint was about the 4 people standing in it. The first was Ezra Pike, who was 71 and had fired the works boilers for 31 years, until the company pensioned him off the plate in the spring, shook his hand, and gave him a coat. He could not lift a sack of flour. The second was Wes Tandy, 24, who had lost his right hand at the beet knives in the campaign of 1888. The company had paid him $200, which was more than most companies paid, and let him go. The third was Jonas Kerr, 33, deaf since a boiler let go at a works in the Salinas Valley in 1885, and no superintendent in California would have him near running machinery. Because a man who cannot hear a bell cannot be warned. The fourth was Delphia Sharp, 41, whose husband had been killed under a beet wagon in the yard in 1887, and who had nothing wrong with her at all except that the works had no place for her and wanted its cottage back. A works that runs in 3 watches has to be fed in 3 watches. And that is a thing nobody thinks about until they are inside it. Breakfast at 5:30 for the day watch, and again at 8 for the men coming off. Dinner at noon, and again at 4:30. supper at 6, and then the night lunch at midnight for the watch that is only starting, and coffee going the whole way through, and bread to be set for the next day before anybody sleeps. In an 87-day campaign, that is 6 feedings a day, every day, without one morning off, and it is why the boarding contract at a sugar works paid better than the same contract at a mine, and why it broke more cooks. 4 people the company had already finished with. She paid them $16, $18, $20, and $17 a month, and every cent of it came out of the money the men paid for their board. By the middle of October, there was a card nailed up beside the mess house door with the 4 names on it, the 4 wages, the total, and 2 words written across the top in a good clear hand. The county farm. Every county in California had one, and no man alive wanted to end his days in it, and for 5 weeks the first thing a new hand was shown in his first hour on the property was that card. The joke never changed. A man would come in off the watch, sit down, and ask across the table what the county farm was having for dinner. If you've made it this far into Etta Boyce's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. The man who led the complaint was the chief engineer, Warren Teague. And it is worth saying plainly that he was not a bully, and he was not stupid. He was 48, he had 19 years on beat and cane machinery, and he was the best liked man on the property. He also had the only real argument anybody had, and he made it in numbers, which is the only way an argument is ever made in a works. $71 a month, he said, out of the board of 103 men who did not hire them. In a campaign, that was better than $200. And what did the works get for it? A man who could not lift. A man with one hand. A man who could not be sent through the boiler house because he would not hear the bell. And a widow who could not cook a dinner for 103 men and had never claimed she could. Out in the works, he said, we run 1 oiler to 40 machines. In there we run 5 pairs of hands to 1 stove. He got the ratio out of a Tuesday afternoon. On the 8th of October, the freight wagon came in with the month's flour and beans, 31 sacks, and there was not one person in that kitchen who could take a sack off a tailboard. The old man could not lift. The young man had one hand. The widow was in town after yeast, and the deaf man was at the ovens with 60 loaves in. The yard foreman pulled 2 hands off the beet sheds for 40 minutes to unload a wagon for a kitchen with 5 people in it. It was 40 minutes, and it cost the works almost nothing, and it was the most expensive 40 minutes of her season, because 60 men watched it happen. The crew agreed with him, and the crew was right, and that is the thing to hold on to. Every figure on the card was correct. Every limitation he named was real. Ezra Pike genuinely could not lift a sack. Wes Tandy genuinely could not wring out a cloth. This was not a story about men being wrong about facts. It never is. What made it bite was the column it came out of. A man's board was stopped out of his wages before he ever saw them, $20 a month gone off the top, and a beetworks hand in 1889 was making $1. $75 a day and sending most of it somewhere. When the yard talked about the $71, it was not talking about the company's money. It was talking about its own. On the 19th of October, the first strike of the campaign came off the vacuum pans, the first sugar the works had made that year, warm and damp and not yet white. It went off in barrels to San Francisco. And the mess house went on buying its sugar in town like everybody else, which was the ordinary arrangement everywhere and struck nobody as strange. Etta Boyce asked Cyrus Hale, the superintendent, for 6 pounds of it. That night the fried cakes came out of the kitchen, rolled in the works' own sugar, and 103 men who had made 9 tons of it that day tasted it for the first time in their lives. They ate them, and they went on laughing at the card. Nobody at Bird Creek knew why she did it, because she never told them, and she had a reason with a date on it. In the winter of 1884, she had the boarding contract at a silver mill above Austin in Lander County, Nevada, 62 men, and she ran it alone with a girl 2 days a week, which is what everybody did and what everybody said was enough. On the 9th of January, she took a fever, and she was 11 days on a cot in the storeroom and does not remember 4 of them. The mill did not stop. Mills never do. Her kitchen stopped. For 11 days, 62 men ate whatever they could open with a knife, and 14 of them drew their time and walked out over the pass rather than stay. Not one person blamed her. That was the part she could never get past. The superintendent gave her a character when she was well enough to hold a pen, and told her honestly that she was the best cook the place had had. And the contract went to another woman in February anyway. And the only record anywhere of what had happened was one line in the mill's own book, in the same hand that wrote down the weather, "Boarding house closed 11 days." She used to say she had not been beaten by the fever. She had been beaten by there being one of her. The reckoning came on Sunday, the 20th of October, in the mess house. After dinner, with 60-odd men on the benches, because a board committee in a camp in 1889 could vote on what came out of its own board money, and this one had voted. Their paper asked for the $71 to be struck off the kitchen's account. Hale sat at the end of the table. Fisk sat with the 2 works books in front of him because Hale had told him to bring them. Teague read the card out loud, name by name, wage by wage, and it took him a little under a minute. Etta Boyce said the figures were wrong. They were low. She had Fisk read her own account instead. $71 in wages, $80 in board because those 4 ate at the same $20 a head every other man paid. $13 for the 2 company cottages charged against her name, $164 a month. $475 across the 87 days of the campaign. She had made the case against herself, $93 a month, heavier than the man making it could make it, and she did it before he had finished sitting down. Then she conceded the people, one at a time, and she did not soften any of it. Ezra Pike cannot lift a sack, she said, and never will again. West Tandy cannot wring out a cloth. Jonas Kerr cannot be sent anywhere a bell is the warning. Delphia Sharp cannot cook a dinner for 103 men and has never once said otherwise. They are all 4 exactly what you say they are, Mr. Teague, and I knew it the day I hired them, and I would hire all 4 again tomorrow. And then she asked him to read his own list. He did, because he was an honest man, and it was his list, and he was proud of it. A second lime kiln, kept warm and standing empty. A duplicate juice pump, bedded, bolted, and dry, that had not turned a revolution in 2 campaigns. A boiler banked on coal it would not burn. 9 knife heads ground and hanging in the loft. A spare centrifugal basket, 400 feet of belting. Fisk added the fuel, the interest and the wages of the man who walked round at night, touching all of it, and put it at $14 a day. $218 for the campaign, more than double her $475, and not 1 cent of it taken off any man's wage. Teague's answer was the best thing anybody said that day, and it was not a surrender. Every one of those, he said, answers a stoppage that costs this company $90 an hour. Your 4 answer nothing that stops. She told him he was right. She said it flat, in front of all of them, and it took the wind out of the room, because everybody there had come to watch a fight, and instead they were watching 2 people agree. It was Fisk who moved it. He had no side in the quarrel, and 2 books open in front of him, and he said the thing nobody in that mess house had ever noticed in their lives. The engineer's spares, he said, are entered in the plant book. Company money, bought once, belonging to the works, and no man in this room has ever paid a penny of it. The kitchen spares are entered in the board book, which is your money, taken out of your wages every week. It is the same decision made for the same reason by 2 different men, and the works keeps it in 2 different books. "You have not been arguing about $71, he said. "You have been arguing about a column." There was a long quiet after that, and then Etta Boyce gave Teague his own words back. "In June," she said, "you stood beside that bedded pump and told me why it was there. You said you don't buy the second pump for the day the first one runs. The only difference between your spares and mine," she said, "is that mine have names and no serial numbers, and yours don't have to sleep. That is the whole of it. This kitchen feeds a works that is not allowed to stop in 3 watches round the clock for 87 days. Every other piece of plant on this property that runs all night has a duplicate standing beside it. The kitchen is the only one that has to close its eyes, and the only spare it is allowed is more of me, and there is not more of me." Hale would not move money off the men's board without cause, which was fair and everybody knew it, so she offered him the other thing instead. "Leave the $71 where it is," she said, "and I will carry the whole $475 out of my own end of the contract from today. If this campaign runs through to the last beat without this kitchen ever once needing more than 1 pair of hands, the 4 of them go at the end of the season, and I eat every dollar of it and never say another word." Teague wrote the terms on the back of the card himself, in pencil, in his own hand. Hale signed it. The card went back on the same nail by the door, and the joke went on exactly as before, except that now the men who told it in the doorway were telling it to a piece of paper with a bet written on the back. The freeze came on the night of the 11th of November. It was a black frost, the hard, clear kind that comes down a coast valley once in a decade, and by morning every beet top in the Pajaro was burned brown, and every grower in the county knew what it meant. A beet that freezes in the ground and thaws again goes soft and will not keep and will not pay. There is no waiting it out. The whole valley lifted at once. By the 13th there were 117 wagons standing in the works yard between the scale and the sheds, and some of the men on them had been in that line 20 hours. A teamster who leaves the line loses his place. And a place in that line was a day of his life and a share of his crop, so they did not leave it. They sat on their loads in the cold, with their teams standing hip-shot in front of them, and waited to be weighed. And the works went to the wall to keep up. Every hour it could slice, it sliced. Then, at 20 minutes past 6 on the morning of the 14th, the main juice pump cracked its shaft. Teague had the duplicate in and turning in 4 hours and 10 minutes, which is the whole reason a works keeps a duplicate, and everybody in the yard understood that perfectly. Nobody ever laughed at his spares. Then his repair gang, 14 men brought up from Watsonville, went at the cracked shaft on the shop floor and stayed at it, day and night, until it was a spare again. So there they were. 103 worksmen in 3 watches, 14 repairmen who could not leave the floor, and a yard full of growers and teamsters who could not leave the line. On the 15th of November, Delphia Sharp's tally counted 238 men on that property who had to be fed, and not one of them could walk to the mess house to be fed there. That was the shape of it, and it was not a cooking problem. Etta Boyce could have cooked for 238 men on her own head and hands. Plenty of camp cooks did. It was that the food had to be in 4 places at once, round the clock, for 5 days. The scale and the wagon line at the gate, the pan floor, the shop floor where the shaft was, and the beet sheds down by the flume. It had to go out hot, it had to keep going out at all hours, the tins had to come back. And the fires could never be let down, because the moment they went down the kitchen was 5 hours behind and could not be caught up. A kitchen with 1 pair of hands cannot do that. Not because 1 pair of hands is not skilled, because 1 pair of hands has to sleep, and a works that cannot stop does not care. Hers ran in 3 relays, the same way the works did. Somebody cooking, somebody carrying, somebody down. And every one of the 4 people on that card did the exact thing they had been thrown away for being unable to do anything else. Ezra Pike, who could not lift a sack, sat up with the sponge. A raised dough must be set at night and held at about the warmth of a man's hand for 9 hours, or there is nothing in the morning. And the man who had held a boiler steady for 31 years held a crock and a bank of coals within a few degrees by the sound of the drought, in the dark, without a thermometer, 5 nights running. Wes Tandy went up the pan floor ladder with a covered can of hot dinner hooked on his right arm, one hand on the rail, which a 2-handed man cannot do at all without a rope. Jonas Kerr worked the pan floor and the shop floor, where the roar of the engines and the fans makes every voice on earth useless. And on those 2 floors he was the only man in the works who could be understood by anybody, because he had been reading faces for 4 years. Delphia Sharp kept the tally, 4 points, every tin counted out and counted back, 3 relays, not 1 pan lost in 5 days. And every 4 hours, at all hours, a basket went out across that frozen yard with 200 raised doughnuts in it, hot out of the fat and rolled in the works' own sugar, and a can of coffee behind it. That was the food that carried it. Not because a fried cake is grand, but because of what a fried cake does. It can be made in the middle of the night, hours before it is wanted. It holds its heat in a covered basket in the cold. It goes up a ladder and along a wagon line and into a man's fist, and he can eat it standing at his team's head without putting down a line or leaving his place or letting go of anything. In 5 days, that kitchen put out 6,000 of them and 3,140 hot dinners in covered cans behind them. The 3rd night was the one the Valley told about afterwards. At 2 in the morning on the 16th, there were still 41 wagons standing between the scale and the gate, frost thick on the canvas, the teams in their blankets with their heads down. And every man in that line had been on his load since the morning before. A lantern came down the outside of the wagons at about 2:30, with 2 people behind it and a basket between them, and they went up that line wagon by wagon, and the men came down off the loads and stood at their horses' heads in the dark, eating hot sugared doughnuts out of a cloth and drinking coffee out of tin. And then went back up on the loads. It took 25 minutes to go the length of the yard. It was done again 4 hours later, and 4 hours after that for 5 days. Emmett Voss, a grower from 9 miles up the valley with 27 acres of beets and 20 hours in the line on the 14th, said the plainest thing anybody said about the whole affair. He said he had never in his life been fed by a factory he was only selling to. On the 16th, in the middle of it, Norman Fiske went back through the 1888 book, because a bookkeeper cannot help himself. He found what he was looking for in the November entries. In the jam of 1888, the kitchen had been 1 contractor and a girl 3 days a week, and it shut its door at 8 in the evening. As any one-handed kitchen must. Men went 14 hours without a hot meal. 9 growers pulled their wagons out of the line and hauled 410 tons to a buyer 22 miles off. The works lost 31 hours of slicing. It was in the book as a single line. Yard delay, $1,900. Not a line about a kitchen. Nowhere in either book was there a line about a kitchen. The works had already paid once for a kitchen with no spare in it, and it had paid $1,900 in a column where nobody would ever go looking for the reason. The freeze week cost the Bird Creek works nothing. Not 1 hour of slicing was lost between the 11th and the 19th of November. Every wagon in the county was weighed, every beet was through the knives, and the campaign ran to the last load. On the 25th of November, Cyrus Hale moved the kitchen's help onto the plant book, where it stayed. The $475 came back to Etta Boyce's account in a single entry, and she never had to say a word about the bet, because Teague did not wait to be asked. He came down from the engine room with a pencil, took the card off the nail, and wrote one word above the 4 names. "Stand by." Then he nailed it back up on the same door. It was still hanging there when the campaign closed on the 12th of January, 1890, 87 days after the first beat went through, and by then the men who read it out to new hands in their first hour were reading it as a boast. That is what it had turned into. "Ask what the county farm is having," a man would say, and then he would tell the new one about the 5 days in November when there were 238 men on the property and a basket of hot sugared doughnuts came across the yard every 4 hours in the dark, and not one man in that yard missed a meal. Ezra Pike sat up with a sponge for 4 more campaigns. Wes Tandy was made second cook the following season at $30 a month. Jonas Kerr was finally taken on in the works itself in 1891 on the pan floor where nobody needs to hear. Delphia Sharp kept her cottage. And a works that had always known and said out loud to every new hand that you do not buy the second pump for the day the first one runs, finally wrote the same sentence about a pair of hands.